Both of my parents were born in Oklahoma. My mom was born in 1926, and my dad was born in 1924. I was born in Elk City, and my brother was also born in Elk City, and we were born in the same hospital in the same bed. So it was the only hospital. My family decided to move to California because my mom's parents were already here. And my grandfather was a contractor, and so my uncle was a contractor, and they were already here. And so my mom said, "You will go to California and be a contractor." So they did. The person I was closest to was my grandmother, but we called her Mama. And she was just a kind person, and I really enjoyed being there with her. She always let me do things that I wouldn't get to do at home, but she's the one that always took care of me, got me off to school. She just lived around the corner from us. My cousins, we were talking one time. I mean, it was only like about 3 or 4 years ago, and they said, "Yeah, Susie was the favorite." And I said, "Why was I the favorite?" She goes, "Because Mama never sent you out to get a switch off the tree. And we had to go pick our own, and she spanked us with it." And I said, "Well, I can't help it. I mean, favorite is a favorite." So that was a funny story to me because I'd never heard that before. And I'm old, I was probably 65 years old before I heard that story. Oh, my grandmother made the best chicken and dumplings. I love chicken and dumplings, and she knew that. So a lot of times when we would go over there, that's what she would fix for us. But she was a fantastic cook. She had 5 children, and there wasn't a lot of money in that time because she was born in like 1909 kind of thing. And so she had to learn how to cook for 7 people. And so she could put anything together. She was a real influence on my life. And she was kind of funny at times too, because there were certain things she didn't allow in her house. You didn't bring in cards. That was a no-no. You didn't dare come to the table in a t-shirt. You had to have a button-down shirt. And the people, the grown-ups, ate, of course, at the grown-up table, and we ate at another table. And when you were done, you took your dishes to the sink. That was another, you had to do that, So she taught me a lot of things. She taught me how to be social and to do the things that I was supposed to do as a young girl. So I really loved my grandmother. I just had one brother, and he died about 9 years ago from Parkinson's, and he had a massive heart attack because he was taking so much medicine for his Parkinson's disease. I really miss him because he was the only one I had, so yeah, it was hard. My brother was 8 years older than I was. One time he hit me. He would just do with his knuckle, he'd hit me. And so I thought, I'm going to get back at him. So him and his friend came to the house, and my parents were gone, and he was supposed to be watching me. And they had brought cigars. And so they sit down, and they were smoking their cigars, and they just had gotten done. I told my mom and dad that Larry and his friend Rick were smoking cigarettes. So my brother got in a whole bunch of trouble, and he had to do some stuff for my dad. So there's things like that I used to do to him. No wonder he hit me, right? Every year in the summertime, when my brother and I were out of school, we get in the car and we would go to Oklahoma, which I don't like being in the car still to this day, but it was fun when we got there because my father had 13 brothers and sisters. But when I got there, it was great because we got to play with the cousins and see the aunts, and they loved my dad because he was the next to the youngest, so they treated us really good. My best friend was Pam Whittemore, and we were best friends all the way until we graduated from high school, and then she got married, but she stayed in Merced, so we still saw each other. And the thing about growing up when I was that, young, I would walk to her house, which was on Parsons Avenue, which is about 3 miles from where I live. And I would walk there, and we would walk all the way over to the other side of town where all the stores and restaurants were, all by ourselves. There was never any question about, you didn't worry about it. You talked to strangers, it was just like a whole different atmosphere. So we had a lot of fun doing that kind of thing. We used to go over to the school that was close to me and ride our skateboards, and it was really fun because we'd just go around and around and around. And my dad built my skateboard out of a piece of wood, and I put my shoe skates, took the wheels off of it, and my dad put them on there. So we used to have a lot of fun doing that kind of stuff. And we weren't the only ones there. Our friends were there too, so it was a lot of fun to do that. Our neighborhood was like, you just went wherever you wanted to. I had some neighbors down the street. They were the kind of people that went sailing. They were real active outdoors. So we would go over there because their whole family would play soccer, or we'd play kickball or things like that. So, and it's just the kind of neighborhood you just went to the house and you didn't have to tell your mom and dad or ask permission, because that's, you could do that and not worry about it. I love Carole King. I loved her music. And also Carly Simons, she was very good too. But I used to, I loved her so much. And the times that I was growing up, we had big wooden consoles, and they had record players in them. So I would open the doors of the console, and I put my head inside, and I'd just sing, put her record on, and just sing with her. Boy, I sounded just like her. My family always celebrated Christmas it was just amazing. We would always go over to my grandmother's with all my aunts and all my cousins. And sometimes we would have a Santa Claus, and we found out who Santa Claus was. My cousin would play the part. But we all opened presents. We did everything, even at my house, where my mom and dad when I lived with them and I was young. We had Christmas Eve, and then we'd go to my grandmother's house and have Christmas Eve. We didn't celebrate so much on Christmas. It was all Christmas Eve that we did. And it was fun because, I had all the cousins, all the aunts bought for all the cousins. So it was really a lot of fun. Well, everybody would bring something over. And so we would just kind of a snack type thing, but it was good food, because all my aunts, they could cook really well, because they learned from my grandmother, of course. When I was about 8, I snuck in when my parents were gone and opened all my presents. And my favorite thing that I got that year was a doll, because when I was young, all the girls wanted dolls. That's just the way it was. And so then I had to wrap them all back as good as I could, but I didn't do it too well because my mom knew. She never said anything until I was probably 12 or 13 years old, and she would say, "You thought you got away with something. I knew you'd done that." Well, it ruined Christmas for me because then I opened them up and I already knew what I got. So I didn't do that anymore because it did ruin Christmas. My mom took in ironing because that she could stay at home. And so she was a stay-at-home mom for a long time. And then she was a waitress. And then she became a manager of Fig Haven Farms. So we got to work there sometimes, So one day I was in the Jeep that I was probably 13, 14. And I was in the Jeep because I wanted to learn how to drive it. Well, they had to repair the office when I got done with it. So, but she, she was a hard worker. She when she was about 50 years old, she went to school and got her broker's license and opened her own realty office. And so I was very proud of her because she really accomplished a lot. So they called it Oak Tree Realty. And my father was also very hard worker, and he was a carpenter. And he learned from my grandfather and my uncle, and they built houses. So then when they retired from the business, then he started working for other people. And sometimes he didn't like doing his job. He would just quit. But he always had another one that he wanted to do. So they were both really hard workers. I wanted to be a pediatrician or OBGYN doctor. But I knew that I wouldn't be able to do that because in my day, girls didn't go to college. And so I just kind of left that dream and started having children and stayed at home. Well, my mom worked at the Fig Haven Farms, but they also had farmers that would bring in corn. So I sold corn in my neighborhood, and you could get like a dozen ears of corn for like 30 cents, so I did that. And then my second job was to ride in a snow cone truck and do snow cones. That was really a fun job too. Then I started babysitting, and my nephew and my niece were born, and they lived next door to us. And so I had a lot of fun with them, and so I watched them also. Then I did home care for kids, child care, and I really enjoyed that. The funny story about it is this one little girl that I had, she was a baby. She was about 6 weeks old. And one day my husband's friend asked what I did. And my husband says, she works for a drug dealer, yes. And I said, what? You can't tell your friends that. But she worked for a pharmacy company for Squid. And she went and talked to the doctors and all that kind of stuff and sold those things. I really enjoyed her little girl because they paid really good. But I really loved my kids that I had. I had 4 babies at one time, and but I loved doing that kind of stuff. Well, I had a lady at a church, and she prophesied over me, and she told me that she saw little children all around me, and that was something that I needed to really think about. And at the time, I was an aide at the Merced City School District in Merced. And so I just loved what I did. The kids were a lot older that I was an aide for and had classes with them. And one day, my aunt, that was a preschool teacher, she said, you need to come over and do the preschool here. So I put in to get to go, and I did. Because I just loved the little ones. I felt sorry for some of them because, they just didn't have a home life. So, it kind of grows on you that you need to help them. I loved my job. I did it for 26 years as a teacher. The only thing I didn't like is the administrative part, trying to change things all the time, and it made it hard on the children. But I loved my job, and I had a tender heart towards them. And so when they'd come to school and not have any clothes that were nice or coats or anything, I kept all my stuff from my grandchildren and from my kids even. And I would always make sure that they had coats and they were warm and had nice clothes, because it's hard on them because the other kids kind of pick on them. So, and also another thing that hurt my heart was they didn't have anything to eat. And at that time, you had to have money to pay for breakfast at the school. So I brought stuff every day. I would bring stuff so the kids could come in and have something to eat. I even had kids that would come from second and third grade because they knew I would feed them. So it's those kind of things that I know was why I was there. I needed to be there. I had a lot of parents that were addicts, and I was responsible to make sure that if I knew that they were, I could not let them go home with them. And I'm so glad I could do that because, I had support behind me to do those kind of things. And also, parents wouldn't come pick up the children, and they would cry because they were the only one in school left. And they knew and wondered what was going on. So there's a lot of those things that I knew that's why I was there, and I needed to just be a helper and care about them, and they knew that. So it really made it a nice experience. The kids had to come in and wash their hands before they could have snack. Well, in our sink, they only let you have, well, not let you, but it was only made so you could have cold water. So I had this little girl come in, and she goes, "Mrs. Chandler, this water's really cold. Did you forget to pay your bill?" And I said, "No, honey, it's just one side, and that's all we have, And a really cute story, too, was my aunt, when she was dying, she asked me if I'd promised to give blood every month to the blood bank. And so I made that promise to her I would. Well, one day we used to have intercoms for each classroom, and the secretary called on the intercom so the kids could hear it. And she said, "Mrs. Chandler, they need to have your blood, so if you can go today." And this little girl came up to me, and she was in tears, and she said, "Mrs. Chandler, don't you know that Jesus died on the cross for your sins? You don't have to do that." And I said, "I know, that's really cute." And I explained to her why I was doing that for, there was a lot, the same kind of story about the light bulb. Our light bulb went out in the bathroom, and another little girl or boy, I think it was a little boy, said the same thing. "Mrs. Chandler, didn't you pay your bill?" So I explained to him, no, the light bulb burned out, and so we have to have the custodian bring another one. So there's so many stories that I don't even remember because, like I said, I did it for 26 years. And I don't remember all the things, but the things that really touched me and made me laugh is the things that I've already said. We had so much fun. I've always liked doing art projects with the kids and just singing songs with the kids and, letting them paint on an easel. They just thought that was the neatest thing. The whole idea of preschool is the social skills that you set up for the children, that they understand that you can be nice. What you see at home doesn't affect you. It affects you, but it's not part of how you have to act. And so I enjoyed being able to show them by my actions that helping children is really important. The funny thing about being a preschool teacher is when you would go out somewhere and they saw you, they didn't know why you were there because you lived at school. You slept at school, you ate at school in your classroom, and so they would hide behind their mom or their dad and they'd look around the corner. "That's Mrs. Chandler, but she's not supposed to be here." But it was really cute, to think about that kind of thing. So yes, but I even have kids that were in high school that I taught, and they remembered me, and their mom said every time that somebody talked about preschool, they would say, "Yeah, I had Mrs. Chandler." Those are nice feelings. I met Don in 1967. I had gone to work at Foster Freeze, and his mom worked there before Dawn did. And so I got to know her. And then when he came, I worked with him because his mother worked during the day, and they had me start working at night. And so that's when my husband, Don, came in. He started working. And so that's how I met him, from doing that job. We could eat whatever we wanted to, and when we had our dinner or lunch or whatever, well, that didn't include the shrimp that was back there. Our boss came in and said, the shrimp is off. You cannot eat the shrimp. Well, we didn't know that. They told us we could eat whatever we wanted to, and he says, you guys just want to go into the freezer so you can mess around, so you've been getting my shrimp. And I looked at him and I went, what? No, that wasn't why we went back there, was to get the shrimp. He asked me to go with him somewhere. I can't remember exactly because that was 54 years ago. But I didn't know him that well, so I wanted to drive. So I can't remember where we went, but when we came back, I had to let him off to get his car where we worked. Well, he got out of the car, and all of a sudden I started going, and he started banging on the window, and I was scared to death. I wasn't going to stop, and he said, my hand is in the door. So I stopped. That was the start of, I kind of trusted him because he was honest with me and didn't try to get in the car. So after that, it just kind of grew from there. Well, we did a lot of weird things because we didn't have any money to do anything. So you have a deck of cards, and we did two things. One was that you would shuffle them. We used to be able to, or I used to be able to do them like this, and they would spread out everywhere. So we would, pick them up, kind of like pickup sticks. We did that. And then we bought a black top hat, which we got, like guys would call it now, would be like a dollar store. We went to Newberry's, and we got a top hat, and we had the deck of cards. So we'd sit on the couch and we'd throw the cards, and whoever got the most in the hat was the winner. So we used to do stuff like that, trying to think of things that, we could do that wouldn't cost a lot of money. He did get me an engagement ring, and when he gave it to me, it was like finalized. We're going to get married. But it wasn't a minute, it was like, that's just what we were going to do. So yeah, it was just like something you talked about, when we get married, and it just kind of not getting down on the knee or anything. Well, for our honeymoon, we had bought a home. Actually, he had bought a home just before we got married. And so we decided what we would do. Would we just take our car and park it in the back, and nobody would see that we were home, because we really didn't have the money to go anywhere. But we were just going to go do something. We couldn't spend the money to spend the night somewhere or anything. So we just decided that we'd just go park in the backyard and nobody'd know we were at home. I think over the years what I've found out is that you need to let your husband always be right. When I say something and he doesn't agree with it, then a little bit later he says, oh, I see what you were saying now. I do a happy dance. Because that doesn't happen that often. My husband has always been there for me. He's very strong and very kind and willing to help. I used to have seizures really bad. And when I had my first seizure, I was at work and the kids saw it, and it just broke my heart that they had seen that. But I didn't know I had seizures. I just started having them. And so when I was in the hospital, my husband had gone hiking, and he was way up in the hills, and so he didn't know, because, couldn't call him and stuff. So when he came home, he found out, and he came to the hospital, and when he walked into the room, I called him my knight in shining armor, because I knew that he would take care of everything, that asked the right questions, make sure they were doing what they needed to do for me, and learning what had happened to me. But it just gave me such a peace that I wasn't afraid anymore. And I've had other things that have happened to me, and he's always been there and been my knight in shining armor. That's just who he is to me. So I used to kid him all the time, in front of other people. Oh yeah, you're my knight in shining armor. And he'd get so embarrassed because, he's not a vain person. He's just a soft, loving person. So, yeah. When we found out we were going to have a baby, we started buying things, and my mom started buying things for us. When I was having children, you didn't have an option of finding out what you were going to have. So it was, a big surprise. The only thing I didn't really like about having a baby is because I was in labor for 7 days, and that was not fun. So it took me 4.5 years to have another one because I didn't want to have to go through that. But a funny story about our firstborn, we didn't have any money again, we were just starting out. And so my husband came in to see her in the room. And the first thing he said is, "What's wrong with her head?" And I said, "What are you talking about? What's wrong with her head?" "Well, it's kind of slopey looking." And so the nurse was standing there. She goes, "Well, it's because of the length of time it was in the birth canal." So that was okay then. But for him to come in and say, "What's wrong with her head?" when you've been in labor for 7 days, those are not the things you want to hear. So then his dad gave him $20, and so he went and bought a Bible with it. And I was irate because we didn't have the money to buy diapers, formula, and he's spending $20 for a Bible. I said, this can't be right. So anyway, that was a funny story. I love my kids. You have your ups and downs with your children, but they were good kids, and they were respectful. And they you knew they loved you by the way that they did things, because they knew that we loved them. And of course, they were like sisters, and so one of them always picked on the other one, and of course, it was the youngest one that picked on the oldest one. But they were really good, and we're glad that we had them because they're wonderful children today. They just haven't changed that much. Grown up a lot, but they haven't changed in their thinking. So that's a wonderful thing. My very favorite hobby, of course, was gardening, but I also love to play golf, and I love to sew. And so gardening is so important to me because it's like a therapy session to go out and put your hands in the dirt and look at something pretty that you're planting. And everybody laughs at me, but I talk to my plants because it's a well-known fact that if you talk to them and tell them how pretty they are, they grow very nicely for you, and they did grow very nicely for me. So that was my big thing. The house that we had before we moved, I had my backyard just full of flowers, and all kinds of flowers. And so I miss that to a certain degree. But where we've moved, I've been able to plant and talk to my plants. Before we had children, my husband and I both loved to ride motorcycles, so he bought one for himself, and then he bought me one. And a lot of the people at the fire department where my husband worked, they all had motorcycles, so it was really fun because then we can go up in the hills, and we would have lunch somewhere up in the mountains, and so we really, really enjoyed that. But the problem is that my husband got a little carried away, and I was driving behind them one time. There was like 6 or 8 of them all on motorcycles. And there was a car coming he was going over the line, so I had to move, and I almost hit them, and so I said, that's enough. We're not going to do this anymore. And plus, you have 2 young kids. That's not something you want to happen. My parents, sometimes there were things said or done that wasn't appropriate for children to hear, and so I was always kind of afraid I would stay in my room most of the time. And then I'd come home from school because we just lived like a block from the school. And so I would eat everything in sight because that's the only way I knew to comfort myself. And so at times it was wonderful being raised by my parents, but other times it wasn't so cool. I think that children are very needy, and that's the way they're supposed to be. And if you don't meet that need, then they don't always respond when they get older about what is good and what is not acceptable. And so it's very important for parents, and when I was a parent, we encouraged them to know right from wrong and what was expected of them as they grew up. So I think that's a really important thing that needs to be done in your house. I was raised in a Baptist church. Baptist preachers, they preach fire and brimstone. And so they get it into you that you better, because you don't want to go to hell. And so when I was 5 years old, I guess it scared me enough that I walked forward and I got saved. But after that, I kept asking my teachers in Sunday school, tell me about God. What does God do? And they couldn't. And I couldn't. What is this all about then? If the preacher is preaching that, you have to be saved, but yet you're telling me. So it was really hard to get that all together in my mind. So I think probably I had to answer my own questions. And I think most people that are coming to the Lord, they have to answer their own questions and ask the Lord what He wants. Be in the Word so that those questions can be answered for you. You can't rely on somebody else to give you that wisdom, because we all learn differently. And so what you learn and how you learn it is what you need to do. But for me, I needed to do it for myself and learn, and not just think, oh, well, God's nobody, let's move on, because that's not how you live. That's not the joy of the Lord in you. So I think that everybody's different. You can read a scripture and that's what you think, and I can read a scripture and this is what I think, but it's still the same. It's just how you comprehend what you learn. I had a wonderful time at church because we had youth group when I was growing up. My brother went. I was too young, but because my mom helped out with the youth group, I got to go to summer camp. And that was so fun to go to camp, because you just show up, and since I was so young, I didn't do anything but just really enjoy it. So then when I was I knew I'd been saved. I knew the Lord was with me all that time. But I was probably about 20. And I realized that we needed to go to church. And that's when my husband bought the $20 Bible. And he didn't tell me that he has accepted the Lord. And I was pregnant with my firstborn. And so we just started, his sister became a Christian. And so she shared with us and stuff. And then I knew that I had been saved. And so we started to go to church then. And, I think the best thing that I can say about my children is we're so proud of our daughters and our son-in-laws, because they care about others. They do for other people. They've raised our grandchildren to be young adults that feel the same way. They know they have a service to do in their lives. They have the gifts that God's given them. My grandchildren are all walking with the Lord, and that makes a big difference too, because as a parent, you don't have to worry about what's going on. They all have jobs. They work very hard to try to accomplish those things, and they don't give up. Our third granddaughter, she is a mom of our first great-grandson. His name is Ari, and he's 6 months old on the 5th, and he's just a sweet little guy. Our grandson is a real deal maker. He goes online and he finds ATVs that he can redo and sell, and then he buys some more. When the girls, our grandchildren, were older than he was, like about 8 years. And so our granddaughter, the middle granddaughter, her name's Abby, and she didn't really appreciate Joey coming along. But Joey absolutely loved Abby. And so Abby's an only child, so she just couldn't understand having a kid like that liked to put his fingers in her food. And the funny thing about it is, I always had them decorate, like cookies. We did that at Christmas. And so my granddaughter would say, Abby, she would say, Grandma, you have to have him have his own decorating stuff, because he takes his knife and he licks it off and then he puts it in my stuff my frosting that I'm doing. And he just wanted to sit by her all the time. But the other funny thing is, it never failed. He always got car sick, so it never failed. Abby's in the back seat, and Joey would have to throw up all over her. And I think that she probably expected that, so she didn't want to sit by Joey anymore. And of course, to us, it was funny, because it was just something he did all the time, so, but he just thought, that's what I do, and he still has a real hard time riding in the car. He still gets car sick. And our other granddaughter, Jenna, we used to hide the eggs. And so one time, my son-in-law, John, and my husband went out to hide the eggs. And so they came in and they told everybody, the Easter bunny was outside. We better go look for the eggs. Well, it freaked Jenna out. She wouldn't go outside because she didn't want to see no big bunny rabbit. So those are just some of the things that we enjoyed with our kids. Because we loved holidays so much, I just thought about some things that we did. One of them is with my grandmother. We called her Mama. And then about the Christmas, we went all out at our house and decorating the tree when our children were young. And so it just means a lot to know that, we celebrated. I remember that we all used to, because I had so many cousins, and so we'd get together on Saturdays, and that was the day we all went to the grocery store, the kids and the aunts. We'd go to the grocery store, and my grandfather we called Daddy George. And so Mama and Daddy George had a Ford station wagon. And so we would, of course, all of us would want to go with Daddy George because he had the, station wagon. It was fun to be in the station wagon. So we'd all go to the grocery store, and it was just, you just knew what was coming next, and that was to go back to Mama's house and have hamburgers. We just knew that every Saturday that's what we were going to do. So it's like tradition, like Christmas or Easter or Thanksgiving. We just knew what was going to happen. I had a cousin, and his name was Johnny Lynn. We all had middle names and were called by our middle names. A lot of times you had to, like Carrie Sue. And so we were very close. And so we were like a week apart. And so if I went over to his house, then I had to play Army. If he came over to my house, he had to be Ken, and I was Barbie. So, needless to say, he didn't like to come to my house, but I didn't like to go to his house either unless we could play in the mud. So, those kind of things, yeah. Our grandchildren used to play all the time together, our granddaughters, because they were so close in age. And so they'd play all the time. Well, our two grandchildren that now live in North Carolina, Kristen and Jenna, they loved to play in the dirt. I mean, our backyard around the tree was mud because they'd do the water and they'd just play in and make, the pies and everything out of dirt. So one day Abby wouldn't go and play. And so I said to her, "Hun, you need to go out and play in the dirt." "Okay, Grandma." A little bit later, she comes in tears, and she goes, "Grandma, I tried, but I just couldn't get dirty." So I felt so sorry for her, that she really tried, but she just couldn't do it. Abby was the kind of person that she didn't even get a drip of ice cream on her clothes, or she would just go, I got it, I got this. So we kind of understood that was really hard for her. We used to go up to Fresno or Kerman because that's where our grandchildren, Kristen and Jenna and Joey, live. So we'd go up there and visit them a lot of times on the weekend. And so one time the girls had a little investment in the office where my son-in-law and his wife, our daughter Sarah, had a business. So the girls decided that they wanted to start their own business. So what they decided to do is in the office, because they had people that came in and bought stuff in this office, and so they decided they wanted to buy sodas and candy bars and put a note on the refrigerator that they were selling them and what they had. So they needed to go to the store, and we were in Fresno, so we went to the Smart and Final. Well, since they were in partnership together, all of a sudden I hear these two little girls screaming about something, and I knew who it was, so I walked over there. I said, "Hey, what's going on?" Well, Jenna had an idea that they should buy more candy, and Kristen decided it was better if they bought more sodas. And so they both said to me, "What do you think, Grandma?" I said, "I'm leaving. I have nothing to do with this." So I just walked away, and so they finally decided what they were going to do, and they bought more sodas because it was hot in Kerman in the summer when they had their most business of selling their stuff. But it was like, oh my gosh, come on, kids, I'm not your grandmother in this situation. You guys are embarrassing me, But anyway, so they had a business, and it was really fun to watch them try to work it out. Work it out. I think the best way to have a good life is to be a good person. You can't just always think about yourself. And I think one of the things that really helps that is when you have children, because you have to be there for them, and it helps you to grow. You realize that you can't be stingy, you can't do what you want to do. You have to take in account that everybody that's in your family is you help them to become that good person, and it makes you feel good because you did a good job when you see as they're raised what a good job you did. I wish you guys stop laughing. You need some tape.